artists and animators. How is the storyboarding process different for 3D shows and films? Well, we invited three industry artists to discuss their experiences working in 3D productions and how it differs from storyboarding for other projects, including games, 2D animation, and live action film. Over the next hour, we will cover topics like differences between productions, helpful tools and resources for when storyboarding for 3D, and what to ask when joining a new production as a storyboard artist. So, Pat, Elisa, Sergio, and Charles, welcome to the live stream.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's start with introductions. Please introduce yourself with your name and your role on animated productions. Pat, let's start with you.
My name is Pat Keegan, and I am a storyboard artist on features and series currently.
Elisa, tell us about yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Elisa. I'm a storyboard artist in 2016, mostly on 2D series, but also 3D series as well, preschooler and teens. And yeah.
Sergio, you're up.
Hi, I'm Sergio Páez. I'm a director and storyboard artist, and I've worked on pretty much everything from like features to TV shows, freelance work, and a lot of 3D stuff, which we'll be talking about today.
And Charles.
Cool. My name is Charles Ratteray. I'm a storyboard artist and concept designer. I storyboard on film, TV, animation, and some advertising.
All right. Charles, how do you describe your experience with the 3D productions, and what was the initial learning curve on your first 3D production like?
See, my first learning curve was well, I could always draw, and I came from the film and TV. So when I got into animation, one of the challenges was to make the drawings move around. So and also like the shot count is way higher, for in animation than it is for film and TV. So what was the other one? The other part?
Yeah.
Part
my question was like, what was the initial learning curve on your first 3D production like? But I think that's an interesting point that, like, with your experience in live action film, you don't want to have a bunch of shots that tell the actors how to act. But in 3D, the rigs don't do acting on their own. Yeah,
you have to draw everything for the 3D. You have to draw everything, all the character actions. You have to explain what's happening. So I think one of the cool things was that since I was coming from film and TV, I was able to stage things nicely, and then I just had to learn how to what to do within that stage. Like I had to explain it. If I had to have the character move around, how was he moving around? How was he interacting with other characters? It's a cool challenge. I really loved it. I was on a project for 2 years, and I learned a lot. I had to ask a lot of questions, to understand how to make things move.
Pat, how do you describe your experience with 3D productions, and what was the initial learning curve on your first 3D production like?
It was a huge learning curve. I spent most of my career in 2D primetime, which has a very static camera and that proscenium staging where, everything's flat and you kind of want the character's center frame and very simple. So 3D that's when you start to introduce some more cinematic language, whether it's, camera shots and lenses, and, the characters have to move in and out of an environment and through an environment. So the learning curve is, you have to sometimes learn how to use three-dimensional cameras or create your own through, draftsmanship. You have to draw the character at different angles. You kind of have to draw the backgrounds moving sometimes, which is a pain in the butt. But it's a whole different ballgame because then, like coming from the 2D staging where I was, just kind of you are the camera. Your drawing is the camera a lot of times where the character's turning in 3D space. You have to be able to draw him from every angle, him or her. You have to kind of move the background yourself through drawing, whether it's just perspective lines or actually drawing detailed backgrounds moving. But it's a lot more drawing to me. It's a lot more fun because then you're able to be more of a filmmaker rather than just a guy who puts characters on a stage and has them, do this like they do in primetime. Very little acting. So the learning curve was steep, but I'm so happy I learned it because it makes you a better filmmaker, helps you become a better draftsman. And yes, that is my shill for 3D at this moment.
No, I think that's really interesting because like already we're getting into some of the technical differences between like 2D productions and 3D productions. In 2D, it's really difficult to have a character moving with a panning background behind them if it's all hand drawn, because then someone has to draw every frame of that, and that's insane.
Yeah. It looks like the Flintstones, where it's just like the flat thing just going from screen left to right or vice versa. It's not very dynamic, but that's a lot of the times that's the extent of a moving background. You're kind of staying on the y-axis.
Elisa, I wanted to ask you about your experience with 3D productions. So what was the initial learning curve on your first 3D production like for you?
Yeah, for me, coming from 2D shows, it was really different. It was quite a shock at the beginning. I was a bit lost because I've never learned before how to move inside a 3D environment. It's really different to put cameras for 2D shows because you need to stay most of the time flat or like you cannot really have crazy angles. But then in 3D, you have to learn again everything. At least for me, it was like that because you have to learn to use the software in a different way or to use different softwares. So my learning was like to find the rules that I had to lean on where I was doing 2D. Find the same rules in the 3D. I mean, when I was in 2D, I was really focusing in, for example, acting or composition, and then you go into 3D and you're like sometimes you lose a little bit of that rules that were in your mind before. So my challenge was to find again that rules inside a new way to work. I don't know if that makes sense. So yeah, and then after the first approach, I found a lot of positive things in 3D too, and it was super fun. Once you learn how to use also the software, it's really fun actually. Yeah, so that was my experience.
Yeah, Elisa, one of the things that we were talking about before the live stream is that every production you've worked on has been a little different because you've worked on like preschool productions and you've worked on productions for older audiences.
Yeah.
So what was it like sort of adjusting to like the different processes that these studios had?
Yeah, like the target makes a lot of difference between the production, but 3D is like every company I've been working for, it's a different approach because sometimes you don't even use just one software. For example, to Boom, you use other software, for example, to screen grab the camera that you want, or sometimes you really use the Toon Boom software or other software moving inside with camera and draw over the screen. So
you've got like previs and you have references that you're drawing over.
Yeah, like with 2D somehow it's harder because you have to draw every time. Also in 3D you don't really waste time to like try a lot of angles, drawing them every time, but you just need to put the camera and it's really quick to see if that works or not. So yeah, like to me it was a continuous discover because every time I change production, I change if it's 3D, I really change every time the way I work on the series or the product. So yeah.
And Sergio, what was your initial experience like with 3D productions?
Well, man, I hated it. I wanted to always go back to drawing 2D boards. And that was my argument. I said, like, I could do this faster drawing 2D boards. So give me the pencil and paper and I'll just do it. And then, you know, in getting more sophisticated with the types of productions that we were working on, the tools got better and the directors got more hungry and they wanted everything to be like exactly, they want it like final, like right away in the storyboard phase. And so like, okay, we'll try it. And so then little by little, like you work up and you build up these tools and you actually get a tighter result. And then, you know, we were talking beforehand how now it's even getting more sophisticated. And then you show a director and you're like, okay, well, where's the lighting? How come that's in black and white? Like, and then you get all this, like, wait a minute, I'm talking about story here. This is the story phase. You're talking about like the final render phase. You know, wait for that. So, okay, it's a little frustrating get into this stuff. But then when you actually get into it, what you realize is what you're doing there is you're filmmaking. You're actually making the story. So the 3D engine is just a tool to actually make something better. So that's when you realize that, then you actually embrace it. And so that's the barrier I had to go through. And then, like, you know, unfortunately I had a couple directors just pound it into my head. Like, just do it, come on, we're gonna do it. And so it made sense. And so that's where tools like Toon Boom came in, because you now have a 3D engine incorporated into a 2D conceptualization tool, right? And that's really, really important, because to me, the most interesting thing about working this way is that you can get accurate cameras and accurate staging, which you could not get before. It's actually very difficult. So I could draw it all day long, but then I would complain. It's like, wait a minute, you didn't get the character sizing right. You're supposed to be using a 50mm lens instead of a 25mm lens. Like, you know, come on. Like, it was just, you know, it's all in my head and I didn't really communicate this. But with the tools now, it's there. You can actually pass something very complete to the next department. And then that's where I get on them and say, did you follow the boards? Now you have to follow the boards, because you establish it, you want everybody to follow the storyboards afterwards. But the tools are getting better, and that means the story should get better. But I guess we can never forget it's all about the storytelling, right?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that it seems like you need to have a very strong understanding of cinematography to be working on like 3D boards. Because you're talking about things like the lenses and the camera angles that you might not encounter if you're doing a primetime 2D animated series.
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, some people who get into storyboards, they think, you just want to make a pretty drawing. But no, it's so much more than that. You are a filmmaker, you're a cinematographer, and you have to know about lenses, because if you don't, and so if you can just draw fancy things, if you're a pretty good artist, you don't know how that comes into the scene and the staging and everything else. Like, you guys were talking about acting before, and I mean, that's so awesome, Charles. Like, how you were working on that kind of stuff is so cool, that you can conceptualize this and then pass it on to an actor. And then now it's their chance to actually take the scene and run with it, right? But like, that's the glory we have as storyboard artists, that we get to establish those things for the rest of the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Sergio, if a storyboard artist who's new to 3D productions came on to a project you're working on, what advice would you give them?
I always like people who know how to draw. And the reason why is because they're quicker at conceptualizing the scene. But the next thing they have to know about is cinematography and staging. And I think the staging part is what people forget. A lot of people have trouble with the choreography of the characters and the camera in a particular scene to describe the story point. And that combination of elements is actually quite difficult. You think okay, it sounds easy. I'm just going to place a camera and I'm going to put a character in here. But to actually make it look cool and to make it look great is very hard. And then you put one and then you put another, and then you stack these things together in sequence. And so then you're at another effect. In order to do that, it takes a lot of practice and knowledge. And so a lot of people come into this and they say, I have the technical skills. I'm really good at 3D. I can move, I can animate, I can do all these things. But can you tell a story? And that's really the key there. So I think the storytelling cinematography part of it is a little bit overlooked when it comes to people coming into this stuff.
When you have a 3D camera, it's such an incredible tool. You can do anything you want with it, but the problem is a lot of people will do everything they can with it. Sometimes that's not what you're supposed to do. You kind of have to learn to motivate it and still stage it properly, clearly for the audience. Just because you can move a camera doesn't always mean you should. But that's the thing. Like, you have this amazing tool, but you also have to use it with reverence, and use it practically and keep it clear for the audience.
Definitely.
It's not always about like, let's do this amazing swooping shot. It's like, well, you can do that, but it's nonsense right now. There's no need for it.
It has to communicate
Yes.
something. Charles, from your point of view as a storyboard artist who works on live action productions, what advice would you give to other storyboard artists from live action who are thinking of jumping to a 3D production?
What advice? Well, they're very the cool thing about like the working in the 3D space is it's very much like how they are in the it's all the filmmaking. I think is the most important part. And I think that's like it's interesting. Like, the filmmaking, I think, is one of the core parts of being a storyboard artist. I mean, you always have to go back to it, and it took me a long time to actually lock into that, because I got very far being able to draw things nice, but as like when you start getting into like the actual like films, then that doesn't work anymore. You have to start have an understanding of the film grammar, your shot sizes. And what I mean by that is like when you look at a show, is like, and also it's a cool thing to, like, if you want to train, if you want to understand things, you can find a show that flows cinematically, and then you can you just take the first scene and then you just start breaking it down, like freeze frame it, and then just looking at all of them, and then you'll see like how they're going in between all the different shot sizes, and how each director will just use the film grammar differently, right? And then you'll like different shows because of the way that director is choosing to juxtapose their shots together, and I think like and there's like, you can learn the film grammar. You just have to, once you learn it, then it's like, the cool thing is that then you internalize that, and then you can understand it, like how to phrase things, and it's I think that's so. Yeah, so if somebody was coming into 3D, like I think that's one of the, you have to be able to know like what those mean, like what do the different shot sizes mean. There's a lot of resources like you can find on YouTube that can tell you more about the filmmaking part, and that's where and then you can take that, and then you put that into your storyboards, and then when you're and then you're thumbnailing things out, it should just be like you're working on the story. You're looking at just how different shot sizes are and how it's communicating.
Yeah,
those arcs. Yeah.
But talking about like, why are you using a wide shot versus a medium shot versus an extreme close-up? What communicates, how it like reveals things about the state of mind of the characters.
Yeah.
I think it's a really fascinating part of filmmaking. I mean, it's like the fundamental, how you connect shots and how you frame shots. I feel like is just like fundamental to filmmaking.
Yeah.
And once you start learning it, you see it in everything that you sort of watch, and can't turn that part of your brain off.
There's some really cool ones like that are done nice, and then you also with the 3D space, you're using the different lenses, which I think is really cool. You can put the different when you know what the lenses do, and you know how it distorts the space or it compresses the elements and within that shot, and then those are things you have to. It's just technical stuff. You just absorb along with the film grammar, and then once you have it, then you're able to speak like if you were like reading a book, like you have to understand what the words individually mean, and then you can start making sentences. And so, yeah, now I'm rambling.
Yeah, no, but you're right in that like the camera lens that you choose changes what you're communicating. Because I think like one of the things that I was taught was that if you look at like The Graduate, there's a scene where he's running towards the camera. They use a telephoto lens which sort of flattens distance.
Yeah.
So it looks like he's not making very much progress at all while he's running. And like just the change in the camera lens that you use has a really big impact on like what the viewer's impression of the scene becomes. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great point.
One more thing is like some of the older films, like there's some actionables like the older Blade, the first Blade film, right? Is really nice because of the way that they tell a lot of their things in shots, right? Like a lot of storytelling is in the shots, and they don't rely too much on the camera movements, which is very, very interesting. No Country for Old Men, that's really nice as far as like been studying the different shots. They have a new one that's out, which I just liked visually how they use their compositions, which is on Netflix. Ripley, it's very, very wonderful. Like seeing like how they're just communicating. You can turn the sound off, and it's amazing. You can totally tell what's going on. Okay, yeah,
Definitely. Pat, is there anything that you would give as advice to storyboard artists who are new to 3D productions?
Could just record and replay everything Charles just said, essentially. You kind of have to, like you said, you kind of have to be introduced or know cinematic language. I'm sure people come from 2D. It's very simple. Like sometimes they'll be over the shoulders, but you kind of have to, know cinematic language. A lot of times, maybe not the lenses themselves, but like you said, you go in and you can play with what the shot does and what it does, how it emotes to the viewer based on, whatever you choose. I think, I'm just going to keep saying the same thing over and over again. Just study live action films, because that's kind of the closest thing 3D productions are going for, is that same type of cinematic language. And you kind of have to use the camera a lot more efficiently, and to give that emotion that you're going for. Yeah. Now I'm rambling. You're supposed to blink when I'm rambling. We talked about this and you didn't blink.
That's the problem. I always blink. Elisa, you have the most experience out of everybody, I think, on storyboarding for 2D productions. Is there anything that storyboard artists who work on 2D production should know when moving to 3D?
Yeah, like as I said, for me, I was a little bit lost at the beginning, but I would say it's normal. Just to me, like it was super useful to have a plan in terms of also schedules are a little bit different sometimes. So for me, to get into the story is not really good to go into environment and moving cameras and do crazy stuff with cameras at first. Usually what I do is to thumbnail things really, really rough, so I can find that emotion again when I place the cameras actually in the 3D environment. So I would say get into the story and the emotions of what you want to communicate, and thumbnail things at first really quickly, really rough, and then get like after this you go into 3D actually. And my next advice to this thing is to do a lot of gesture drawing. Like for me, it was super helpful because the quick poses with model, or also copying from, if you don't have the model, like you can go online and find a lot of stuff. It quickens, I don't know if that's the right word, like you get really quick, and you get really quick to find the emotion and the intention of that pose. If you do a lot of life drawing, that would what I would suggest that definitely, and also copy from the movies, but the others say that already. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that
Copy.
answer
I mean,
because...
copy also understanding like what you're copying, of course, not just copy that.
But,
Can I amend my answer?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Can I amend my answer real quick?
Sure, go for it.
One thing that I've learned when being introduced to 3D productions is like the idea of scouting, which you don't really do in 2D. A lot of times, maybe the director or supervising director might do this. They'll scout with you there. They'll go through a 3D environment and look for shots. Sometimes you have to do that yourself, which is great. But you're at the limitations of the scene already, like what's already in there. And so I would say whatever production you're on, like become familiar with just moving around within it. You don't really necessarily have to know the 3D software in and out, but know enough to maneuver and do what's called like scouting with the camera. I'm going to mute myself again.
Really powerful to be able to bring in the set and to see like what the shots could be, you know, sort of decide like, oh yeah, this is a cool piece of architecture that was designed. We should use this. Elisa, I like that your answer also brought in thumbnailing, where even if you're working on a 3D production, you still need to know how to tell a story visually and decide what you need and get those sorts of shots nailed down before you get into the sort of the nitty gritty of however your final shot's going to look.
Yeah, like it depends on the person. Like it for me it's like that. But for example, a lot of my colleagues just start just blocking stuff, and which is totally fine if you find it useful. Like for me, it's better the other way, but like both ways are great. Yeah. The important thing is not to lose the intention and the emotion of the story, of course.
So I'm more familiar with challenges related to 2D animation production and 3D animation. Elisa, in your opinion, like what aspects of a 3D production should a storyboard artist speak with the director or supervisor about ahead of time? Like what sort of questions do you ask when you join a new production?
From my experience, every time, as I said, is different. So what I ask is which software are you using, because it's not always Toon Boom, unfortunately, and also in question about schedules or like I know maybe it's lame questions, but before the production starts, you never know. For example, if all the environments are ready, so probably sometimes you have to draw a whole sequence, for example, also with BG and stuff. So it, like if you have like the important thing is to have enough time to do things. So to ask in advance, like for me, it's how much time basically I have for an episode or things like that. And if there's do's or don'ts in this production, for example, if some characters needs to, like for example, in a production, as I said before, I cannot put characters in profile, for example, because they look ugly, or there's things like that that I can know beforehand, so I know already, and I don't make mistakes like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that it's really helpful to talk about things, even things like schedule, because those are significant details that affect your job as a storyboard artist.
Also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, just wanted to add also in terms of schedule, how far you go with cleanups, for example, like how many details they want you to put in the shots. It's important to know, because sometimes you're in a production when they want a really rough thing, so maybe you don't need so much time to do that. But if they want a lot of details or a lot of things in the scene, it's important to have enough time in order to hit the deadline. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like how much detail should be on a board is always a contentious topic. Because there is a camp that's like, hey, the job of a storyboard artist is to define the visual storytelling, and that's it. And you don't need to do like shading and colors and animation on the boards to do that. And there's another school that's like, if it's not on the board, then it's not going to be in the final production. And I just think that's kind of an interesting tension.
I mean, there's one thing I always say. It's like you shouldn't cover up substance with technique. And that's one of the things I always get on the artists that work with me is that they try and do something fancy, but I always push them as like, you have to justify what that fancy does does it help the story? Does it move the characters in the right direction? And a lot of times when we're talking, we've got this discussion between 2D and 3D. 2D artists seem to like roll things across in a 2D way. Like they're panning stuff. And then 3D artists, what the worst part is that when you go into 3D, they still start doing that panning stuff, but you have so much more to play with when you actually do that. And I would say you got to have things coming at the camera and going away from the camera and using the depth to make it happen. But you can't do it at sacrifice to the subject matter or to the story. Sometimes it's actually best to just hold that shot and let the actor or the animator, emote and do the thing and just hold the frame, because that's the most effect that you're going to get, let's say, to the audience. But other times, and this is another trick that I use too, is like the scripts are so bad. The only tool you have in your pocket is to make something visually interesting. So then you have to come up with really unique staging. And that's where like I've had some really bad dialogue scenes where it's just like on the nose, there's no subtext. And so it's like, okay, what do you do in that case? And that's where you have to use the depth. You have to use the stage to actually make it interesting. So, you plant your character and let's say you start on a medium shot and then roll them through the scene, like push them through. And then you actually end up on a close-up and then the camera will pan to the right. And then a character comes in, motivates that camera going to the other direction. So then there's something visually interesting, even though they're saying just the most dull and boring stuff. The best types of scenes are going to combine all that together. And then that's where you can really get gold. But you need an artist who actually understands those things in order to really, push it to the next level. And unfortunately, and I'm guilty of this too, is like that you do something and then somebody else will point out to you like, that's a little boring, or that's kind of cliche. Why did you do that? Why don't you try something else? It's like, I should have thought of that. You're right. Oh my God. And then you got to go back, you change it, you do it again, right? So it's nice to have, it's nice to work with a team. You have people who've got your back doing stuff. But it's like, you can't just put something up there for flashy. You have to defend yourself that it actually should be in the story.
There's this great image online that has a camera movement guide and has like dolly, boom, jib, truck, pan, tilt, roll. That's the on the filmmakers, cinematographers camera movement guide, and then the client movement guide, it's pan, 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 pan.
Right.
And I just think that like being able to like know that you have all of these options with how you're moving the camera is interesting.
Yeah, but to that point though, it's like I always say, don't touch the camera unless there's a reason to. And then, some people get on my case like, yes, Sergio, you're so boring. But like, if you can't tell the story without touching the camera, there's something wrong. You have to also be able to, make good use of your tools. So that's where like the filmmaker aspect comes in here. And I forgot, was it you that said it, Pat? It's like, all of a sudden you push all these buttons and then it's like, you try to do all these whiz bang things. And it's like, the tools are so good right now, like on your home computer, you can start doing these crazy visual effects. But I think, getting down to the root of it is like, what should we be doing? Like those are some of the questions that I think, a board artist should always ask, like, is this the right decision? Is this the best decision for the story at right now? And if the answer is yes, then go for it. But
Sergio, I wanted to ask you, what aspects of a 3D production should a board artist speak with a director supervisor about ahead of time? Like, what would you want to make sure that someone who's new on your project is asking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember when I first started up on like Clone Wars, for example, I worked on that Star Wars series back in the day, and they were first experimenting with 3D. And I remember asking one of the visual effects supervisors, it was like, are there any limitations to the types of shots we can do? Because my previous job was like working on this video game, and it was so limited, and they didn't have the resolution, couldn't handle it, and the polygon size of the characters was like limited. So they came back, they're like, no. And I was like, wow, no kidding. It's like, you guys have a lot of budget here. Uncle George here is paying for a lot. And so really we could do anything. And we did like a lot of like oneer shots, which I don't know if you guys are familiar. Well, I'm sure that our panelists here are familiar with that, but like the audience members is like, if you just these really long shots. So imagine, famous one is from like Goodfellas, where they're like, there's a big steady cam shot where they go down into like the basement and they follow the characters. But I mean, you can find examples of this in a ton of movies. But the idea is that you can do these like really long, scenes, and that's actually normally like expensive. There's like budget issues, like you have to have the right set and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things I would ask is like, what kind of budget are we dealing with? What kind of are there any limitations, right? And so the other thing that happened is I was working on another production where they tried to mimic the old school Star Wars film. So like episodes 4, 5, and 6, where there was a limited lens choices there. So like the outer space shots were in 75 millimeter. All the cockpit shots were in, I think it was 24 millimeter was the widest you could go. And so there's a limit. And then what the thing was, you actually get the look of those films if you follow the camera guides that they're using. So, I was always one of these guys trying to break the rules, but it's nice sometimes to understand what your limitations are, and then you can be creative within that. And then the last question I would ask too is like, one good thing, if a lot of times when you're new to a production, you don't really know what question to ask. You're just sitting there and it's this like overload of information. They give you the script and they tell you what to do. But one of the things that I find is really helpful is if you can pin the director down on what the point of the scene is, and even if it's not specific, if like somebody says, okay, the point of this scene is the character realizes that they have to go to another location at the end, like they got to go find another prize or something like that. Oh, okay. Then it doesn't matter how you get there really, but if you fulfill that point, then you understand what you have to do in that scene. And a lot of times, even though it may not be exactly what the director wanted, if you fulfill that point, it's like, oh, okay, that kind of works. Oh, it's the same thing. We're getting to the same place, but you just did it differently than I would do it. And I think those are a couple of things that you could do. But yeah, ask questions for sure. Otherwise, it always makes you look good too. If you ask questions like, yeah, what should the character be doing right now, Mr. Director or Mrs. Director? And then they think, oh, this guy, he's on it. Yeah, they're invested in the production.
It's okay to ask questions. Some young artists or newer artists might think asking question means they're not experienced enough or unsure, or it makes them look bad in some capacity. But Sergio's right. You rather ask it, get that out of the way. So a week after you go to do your scene, you come back and it's all wrong because you just went in. You were too nervous to ask questions, or you thought, or something got in the way, whether it's your ego or whatever. You didn't want to ask any questions that make yourself seem weaker or less deserving of that job. Now you're a week behind.
Also to add, shot lists are nice. A shot list and an overhead character plans are nice. X's and O's, lines for like character paths and stuff like that. Those are great.
Yeah, that's gold. I mean,
yeah,
like a lot of sometimes like I don't know if you guys ever worked with a director that doesn't know what they're doing, so then you're like you're just clueless. And then then what I would do, Charles, like I would literally make a map and I'd be like, oh, is this what you're thinking? The character comes in the room this way, right? That's what it
exactly.
is? Oh, no. He comes in through the back. Okay, why didn't you say that? It's like, then it's like, okay, with a little map drawing, you can solve these problems. To Pat's point, like, yeah, you spend a week on it and all of a sudden you got to redo it.
Also to add is like, if they're really on it, is if some thumbnails are awesome. Like, and then even if they say like, oh, I can't draw, I'm like, just X's, O's, like, scratch little figures, just so I have an idea of like where they're thinking about general composition, right? Like, oh, the character that little tiny in the frame here, like, or big. I'm like, and it just helps shave down unneeded exploring, in directions that aren't going to be helpful.
Yeah. Having a bird's eye top-down action map is very helpful. Charles, what did you ask when you joined the production, 3D production for the first time?
I always ask for those. I don't the shot lists and the overheads. I always ask that. I ask for it, but rarely do I get it. You know what I'm saying? But I'm like I'll just ask. Just to see if they have a general idea. Also, what I usually love doing, I love asking for all the references that they've been looking at, and anything. I know it doesn't matter what it is. Even if it was like, oh, I got this picture, nothing else matters in this picture except, like what's on this dude's shirt, right? Like a brooch or whatever. Just so I can kind of get an idea of like the feel of where they were. And then I'll spend like 3 hours or so doing a reference pull myself after I've gotten theirs, so I can put in the direction that I would like to add to it, and then that's helpful. As many jump points as possible is the best. So it's less thinking and more intuition. On the thumbnails. Just jumping into something that's already running, that people already are working on, and I'm just coming in. Then I'll just ask for everything. So I don't have to. I can rely more on instinct rather than having to think too much about it on the first few hours. Just kind of just jump in there.
Yeah, and to your point of like asking for materials and reference up front, knowing that like the directors find that like that one brooch is really important. That's a good thing to know if you're working on a scene.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know it's important, then maybe you don't have shots where the camera lingers on that brooch.
Mm-hmm. Also, I also like if they allow it. I like to look at what everyone else has been doing. Because then I'm like, oh, this is where everyone's going. This is generally what's been approved. Of course, I'm going to come and do my own thing, but at least I understand. It just helps. The more guardrails is like the more creativity you can have, right? Is like if you go in there and you like, oh, you can do anything, right? It's just then you can be there you can burn 6 hours, like spinning in place. It's so yeah, I like to see everything. And if they allow it, see everybody else's stuff, and yeah.
Pat, from your point of view, what aspects of a 3D production should a board artist speak with the director or supervisor about ahead of time?
Well, every 3D production I've become a part of, the director will give like a packet, like a lookbook, whatever you want to describe them as. It's like all their visual references and their cinematic language. But just to piggyback on what Elisa and Sergio said, is like asking, what am I allowed to do? Like, what are the do's and don'ts of this? What kind of shots are going to work for you? What kind, because you have a 3D camera, so you can do whatever you want. You want to ask them, what can I do? Like, what's not part of the show? Because each show has their own cinematic language, and you don't want to deviate too much from that because it's not consistent with the style of the rest of the show. I mean, luckily, going on to like a second season of a show or a different season, you kind of have that whole other season to use as a reference point. But, a lot of things have already been mentioned, like what software we're using, how loose and rough are we allowed to be with our drawing? Because a lot of times, coming from the 2D primetime world, it's like on model, be on model, do not deviate even an inch of their finger. Everything's got to be perfect because we're shipping your boards off overseas. But on 3D productions, which I love, it's like just tell the story of the scene. You can be loose, a little bit identification of what each character is. Sometimes it's different colors in their matting, but you want to know ahead of time, like what loose of our thumbs, like how loose you want those to be, and like how rendered do you want our final boards to be. So that's super important. So a lot of times you're working very fast, so you want to be very loose and gestural to tell a story. Yeah, there's a lot of questions, but I still have questions even like the last week of the production, because you're constantly learning. By the time you're at the end of your run on a show, that's basically when you figured it out. Usually you're ready, but you're done. You're like perfect for that production, but you're rolling off because you learned it by then.
Pat, are there tools in Storyboard Pro that you think are particularly helpful in 3D productions? And do you use the 3D stage and import 3D models, or do you primarily draw like you would on any other production?
I do a little bit of everything. I think the staging helps just to draw like very rudimentary environments, just to get a sense of perspective, moving, or you're moving in space, whether you draw just like vertical lines that pan towards the camera or pull towards us, left and right, all these things. Sometimes if I have a scene that is already built for a production, yeah, we'll import it to Studio Pro, but a lot of times that it's not as efficient because you have this giant model, so it's hard to like break that into panels. So sometimes you like to take screenshots of that, use your camera, take screenshots, and then import those as backgrounds. There's a lot of workarounds to make the program more efficient, because working with 3D models it's a slog sometimes in any program. It just takes a lot of your processor speed. So I always say break it down as simple as you can. You know, take the 3D model and just draw simple shapes of it, of the background space, and work with that. But the stage has been great for me. I love when things move in depth and there's moving camera. I love that, when that you're able to achieve that in any program. And I'm rambling, so please move on to the silky smooth Sergio. You can always tell like who has the YouTube channel. Like Sergio answers. He's so like articulate.
Elisa, I do want to ask you quickly though first. Are there tools in Storyboard Pro that you think are particularly helpful in the 3D production? And do you use the 3D stage and import models, or do you primarily draw like you would on 2D productions?
Yeah, like I said before, every time I change pretty much. So I do a little bit of everything too. Usually, my favorite thing is to import the environment and move camera around. But sometimes in some production, you need to use Blender also, or other software to block out things, because probably the environment is not even ready. So you block out things yourself somehow, and then you screen grab whatever angle you need, and then import everything in Storyboard Pro, or even using other softwares as well. That happens sometimes. So yeah, it's really different for each production for me.
That's interesting. Sergio, are there tools in Storyboard Pro that you think are particularly helpful in the 3D production?
Yeah, in terms of 3D, like the killer app there for Storyboard Pro is when they put in the 3D engine and the timeline, right? Because what separates, to me, Storyboard Pro from like another, like Photoshop, for example. Photoshop has a timeline now. You can do boards in Photoshop, but it's kind of clunky, to be honest. And then when you got like another tool like Storyboard Pro, the timeline is so smooth when it comes to doing panel-to-panel stuff. And then you got a 3D engine that's already built into the program. So you don't have to go switching back and forth to like Blender or Maya or something like that. And then now those packages are super sophisticated, right? It's like, would blow your mind if you go and you can do so much in Maya and Blender. I think Maya is pretty clunky and kind of outdated, to be honest. But the thing is, like, you gotta break it down to like what it is that you want in the most basic thing. Because even in Toon Boom, you can get lost in like, and what happens, you start animating, and then you start animating the character, and you start animating the background objects or something like that. And then it's like Pat's point, it's like the time just goes by, and everything just gets sucked up. And then all of a sudden you only have like 3 panels done. Like, oh man, I got this whole scene left to do. And so the way I work is I do the thumbnails, and I'll do that on one layer. And then when I know what I'm trying, like the target is, when I actually have that like organized in my brain through the thumbnails, right? I'll go in and create the 3D shots inside of Toon Boot. And so then now I like open up the 3D engine, so to speak. I mean, there's ways to do that. I'm not going to get all technical with it, but so then what happens is you can draw the character if you want on a particular 2D layer inside the 3D space. You adjust the camera lens, but then you can start moving and pushing the camera around to create the pan shot or whatever, right? Or if it's like an action scene there, but you already know what you're going for. So then at that point, you don't get lost, or at least I don't get lost in like animating the little details of a model that I bring in there. And so then you can actually finish, because I've gotten to the point where it's like, now I have to work at, all the way till midnight to hit this deadline because I've been, goofing around on all these other buttons that I probably shouldn't have been pushing. So I think it's, the tool is there. It's really solid. And it's like, you got to practice first your setup and your pipeline until you actually get it done. And then when you do that a couple times, you'll be good.
And Charles, are there any tools in Storyboard Pro that you think are particularly helpful in a 3D production?
I really love how easy it is to create story in going from panel to panel to panel, and then and the video layer. The video layers are really amazing because you can draw on the top of them. Yeah, it allows you to stay in a flow. I think that's really important when you're trying to figure out what's happening in that particular scene. And yeah, creating new shots it's beautiful. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see definitely how like being able to jump between like reference and what you're working on can be really helpful. Mm-hmm. Do you work on like 3D productions differently than you work on like live action productions, or do you feel that it's pretty similar for your purposes?
Pretty similar. I usually treat the 3D productions that I've worked on like as if I'm working on a film. So I'll if I need to get in there and do the scouting, like what Pat was referencing, that's really interesting. So you can pick whichever shots you need, but it's pretty similar.
So I have a ton more questions to ask, but we are actually running out of time. So Charles, where can our audience go to see more of your work across the web?
Oh, cool. I'm on ArtStation is the best one. That's where I put all my updated artworks. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I have a YouTube. I put some of my animatics for Blue Eye Samurai up in there. But ArtStation is definitely, you can just see it shows the whole array of things I do, the concept stuff, the freestyle arts things, and the storyboarding.
Yeah, and you use first name, last name as your handles on ArtStation and all the platforms.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. Pat, where can our audience go to see more of your work?
Mostly on Instagram and YouTube. My Instagram handle is @NoOneCaresPat, all one word. And the YouTube channel is A Tinge of Ginge, where I put most of my longer form stuff.
We care. Elisa, where can our audience go to see more of your work across the web?
So for personal stuff, Instagram, you can find me with Elisa Bindi or Instamonne. But you can find me with my real name as well. And for professional work, like portfolio or production, I've been working in my website, elibindi.com.
All right. And Sergio, where can audience go to see more of your work on the web?
Yeah, you can go to my website at just sergiopaez.com and find me there. And also, I run a storyboarding platform to help people get into the business. If that's something you guys are interested in, you might want to check out storyboardart.org as a resource.
Yeah, we were just chatting before the live stream that it's a really great resource and has been really helpful. So thank you, Charles, Elisa, Sergio, and Pat for joining us to discuss storyboarding for 3D productions. For artists who are interested in storyboarding, you can download a 21-day trial of Storyboard Pro from our website. That is toonboom.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, next week Mike Morris will be hosting Collaboratory, which is our improv storyboards show done in Storyboard Pro, and you won't want to miss it. So thank you all for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.